All right, so today we're going to talk about subleasing. So what is a sublease? A sublease is when a tenant leases space directly from another tenant, as opposed to a landlord. Most leases are directly between a tenant and a landlord, but in the sublease scenario, a tenant is leasing space from another tenant. When are subleases typically available? When a tenant has too much space or too little space and they need to move. It could be the fact that you lose employees, that you're downsizing, and as you look around you realize you have way too much space and it would make more sense to move into a smaller location. In that case, you would want to sublease the first space that you're in to try to get as much money back as you can to augment those losses. And then on the flip side, sometimes companies are just growing so fast that they're inefficient to stay in too small of a space, and so they need to move into a larger space, and in that case as well they sublease the original space. What's a typical sublease scenario? I just kind of went through that. Businesses either are growing or shrinking is the main reason. If a business is perfectly content where they are and they have the right amount of space, they're not typically going to sublease. But if you're growing or shrinking, this is oftentimes a great opportunity to consider pursuing if you're a business tenant. Why is a sublease a good choice for a new tenant? So typically a sublease is offered at a lower lease rate compared to the market rents. For example, if the original tenant is paying, say, $20 a square foot for their space, they might sublease it for $15 a square foot, so that other tenant would realize that $5 benefit per square foot. And depending on the size of space that's leased, that could be a substantial incentive for the subleasing tenant. It also allows the subleasing tenant to kind of try the space out and see if they like it, because once that original lease term ends, they could always negotiate with the landlord to stay longer if they wanted to. How long does a sublease last? Typically it lasts till the end of the original term for that original tenant. So if there's a year and a half remaining for the original tenant's lease, typically the sublease coincides with that tenant's lease end date. As I mentioned already, it's possible to negotiate an extension with the landlord, but that will be a wholly separate negotiation that you'll engage in. Why do tenants offer sublease? It's almost always to save money or to make more money. If you're growing, or if you have a business model change and you're growing, it's basically a way to adapt to the current market conditions. A lot of leases are 3 to 5 years or longer, and lots can change in that period of time. So if any kind of business need changes during that, then maybe a sublease is the right option then. Is a sublease a good option for all tenants? No, not necessarily. Sometimes it's better to directly lease a space to the landlord rather than a tenant. The power of a direct lease to the landlord is you can negotiate the entire lease, as opposed to just agreeing to pay the rent for the other tenant. You actually negotiate the terms of the lease, and that could include things like build out. You could have the space designed for your needs. It could include things like free rent. It can allow you to negotiate option terms. So if you like the space after the original term, you can extend. All of those types of negotiations take place with the landlord and not the tenant. So it's not always the best option, but if it's the right need for the right user, it can be a great option. Why is subleasing difficult? The main thing is the amount of time. Unless you're a short-term user, if you're a typical, say, office tenant that wants a 3 to 5 year term, a lot of subleases are far less than that. They could be a year or two or less. It can be hard to find sublease opportunities as well. They're not necessarily promoted as much as typical listings are. And a big driver is also many brokers shy away from presenting sublease opportunities because it can be hard to get paid a commission. The original landlord's already paid a commission to a tenant for that first tenant, and they're not likely to want to pay a second commission for a subleasing tenant. So usually that money for the tenant rep has to come from the tenant, and if they're already short on cash, they might not even have that available to pay their broker. And so it can just kind of create a jam there. Most landlords are used to paying commissions to tenant reps, so they build it into their their negotiations, and they're aware of the fact that they need to pay it. Most tenants aren't necessarily prepared to pay a commission to a tenant rep broker. So it can be hard to get a broker fully engaged in a tenant in a sublease scenario. Who commonly subleases space? Seasonal businesses. You'll see Halloween stores pop up every August, September to get ready for the Halloween season in October. Pop-up stores have become an interesting trend. That's where stores open up in spaces that are subleased spaces because they can do a short-term business model and take advantage of those lease discounts. You'll see political campaigns lease space in election years. And there are plenty of other short-term tenants out there that can make use of subleases. So there you have it. That's all you need to know about subleases. If you have any other questions about commercial real estate, feel free to visit my website at lighthousecre.com or shoot me an email at david@lighthousecre.com. And you can find me on linkedin.com as well. You can see my username is David N. Haug there, and I go by the Cree Guide. Thanks for your time.